All right, let's talk about transitioning and softening those transitions between Booleans because they can end up being a little bit harsh. So I'm going to go through here. I'm going to grab, it doesn't really matter what primitive you want. Let's go ahead and grab a cube here, go into edit mode. I'm going to choose matte cap gray. And if I want to, I can go down here to initialize, and I'm just going to simplify this cube. If I turn on polyframe, let's go ahead and make Polymesh 3D. If I go to initialize now, I can do QCube, and that'll just kind of simplify my cube here. So just like before, I'm going to go here to geometry. We're going to turn on dynamic subdiv, just tap this dynamic button. We're going to turn up QGrid and then change our coverage just to kind of get a nice beveled cube here. And now if I want to start doing the live Boolean, I need two objects to work with. I'm going to duplicate this off, and we'll select it, and then we'll just move this up. Let's say we're going to move it up to this front corner here. And now if I do an intersection between these two, if I do a subtraction here, and I turn on live Boolean, you're going to see it subtracting that out. Now, again, this is all live, so I can go into the properties for this one. We can do dynamic QGrid, and we can choose, a different type of coverage to soften those transitions. I can soften them way out, or I can just, keep whatever I want in there. Now, the other thing that's a little bit harsh is I get soft transitions here, but not on the outside. So let's talk about ways we can kind of alleviate that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my subtool, Boolean, turn on dynamic subdivisions because we're using them. These dynamic ones are turned on here, and I'm going to hit make Boolean mesh. And so now if I go here, you're going to see we have our Boolean mesh. We turn on polyframe, we're going to see we have the original topology for and the original polygroups as well for all of these meshes. But now there's a pretty harsh line separating those two. So probably the fastest way to go ahead and alleviate this is go to geometry, Dynamesh, and I'm going to turn off project, turn off blur. I'm going to crank my resolution up just a bit and hit Dynamesh. Let's crank it up a little bit more. There we go. So we've Dynameshed this mesh, and that's just given us new topology. We still have our polygroups in here. And now what I can do is I can go to my deformation, and we can do like polish by, probably polish or smooth or relax. You can also go to clay polish if you'd like. You can do a little bit of polish, and then you can go to geometry, clay polish. You can play with some of these settings and kind of, polish your object however you'd like to kind of get the bevels that you want along your edges. If we undo that and we do Control-Shift-Tap this polygroup, this one, and then Control-Shift-Drag to invert that selection, we can mask these now. We can Control-Tap in our document to mask, Control-Shift to bring everything back. And now what we can do, if we want to, again, if we did a deformations polish, anything that's unmasked is going to polish, so it'll start polishing things around here you may not want it to. So instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is go to masking grow. So I'm going to grow mask a couple times and then control tap to invert that mask in our document. Or you can click the inverse button here, and now you're kind of protecting everything else from the deformations that you want to do to these edges here. So if we go to deformation here, and again, do a smooth, you can do a relax, you can do a polish, any of those things to kind of polish those edges to kind of get them to bevel. Of course, there's another couple of options we can do. Let's undo back to where we get our original topology back here before we Dynamesh. There we go. So again, we have polygroups available to us. So one thing we can do is you hold that Control Shift, and let's isolate these polygroups here. I can just Control Shift click the select one, Control Shift drag to invert that, and then click these other polygroups here. Or if I want to, I can kind of go here to the middle, and if I Control Shift click these vertices between the three, it'll select all of the polygroups at once. So now that I have these all selected, we have a border around this now. Of course, in the previous videos, you saw me do this exact same thing. I'm going to take our stroke menu here, and we're going to go to curve functions, and I'm going to go turn off these other options, just do frame border. So I'm going to frame our mesh here, Control Shift tap to bring everything else back. And now we can go to, say, brush curve BC curve tube, and then we can just tap on this tube curve right here. We can make our draw size smaller if we want to. And now that we have that, we can tap away from our mesh or just go to curve functions delete. And now we can go to subtool, split, unmask points. And now we have two objects here. We have our original object here, and then we have one that we can actually now turn into a subtractive mesh with live Boolean is still on. I turn polyframe off, and now we have an interesting transition between those two surfaces. Now with this one selected, I can still go into deformation. It's live Boolean, so I can go in here and I can do things like inflate or deflate to kind of change those transitions as well. And just like the previous videos, if you didn't want to pass a tube through here, you can pass a strap, a block, a curved mesh, any sort of transition you want between these two surfaces, you can do. Let's go ahead and delete that. And we'll turn off live Boolean for now. And we'll go ahead and we'll try one more thing. So I'm going to do Control Shift click and grab these and invert that. And now if I Control tap in my document, I'll mask this. Control Shift to bring everything back. And now if I hit W, we're back into gizmo mode. But there is such a thing as transpose modeling. So if I hold down Alt and tap this one, if I hold down Control, actually it's Control tap to invert that. If I hold down Control and scale, I won't be able to transpose model with this gizmo. So what I can do is I can turn that off and go to my transpose line, or I can hit Y which is the hotkey to toggle that on and off. And now if I hold down Control with Scale selected, as I Control drag this in, you're going to see it's adding an edge loop in here. So I can add an edge loop, and then I can add an edge loop and bring this in, and then with Scale selected, I can also kind of push it out, or I can use Move to kind of hold down Move and Shift to kind of give me a little edge ring around here. So now that I have that edge ring, you know, again, I'm already just beveling around this edge, but if I want to, I can actually go in here into my polyframe, go to my Z-modeler brush, BZM, hover over this new edge ring I have, and then we can insert multiple edge loops with interactive elevation. And now I can choose when I pull out, I can round this corner off here, or I can actually even pull in. I can pull in and round that corner off, or I can pull, like I said before, pull out, round that corner off a bit. And now when I go back to my polyframe mode, I've got a nice smooth bevel around here. Of course, that inset edge is just how much you want to transpose. Hold down Control and transpose that amount in, and then you can bevel more. So let's give that a shot. I'm going to hit W, and I'm going to make those lines quite a bit thicker here. There we go. So you've got nice thick transitions around those. And actually, let's pull this out again. If you want more information on the transpose brush, go to my Intro to ZBrush Part 1 on my YouTube channel, and then I'll kind of walk you through the intricacies of the transpose line. And again, it's a really powerful line. So we've made a nice large bevel around this now. So now we can go in here with our Z-modeler brush, hover this edge, BZM, insert multiple edge loops, interactive elevation, and we'll just kind of pull this up and kind of soften, again, that transition between those two. Another interesting one you might want to try, let's go ahead and with our undo slider, I'm just going to drag this and we'll go back to where we just have our original mesh here. You can also try giving panel loops a shot. So if I go in here and isolate these, once again, Control-Shift, clicking, and then Control-Shift, dragging to invert, and then adding these selections to our inverted selection, Control-Shift, drag to invert again, Control-W to go ahead and make this all one polygroup. And now with this visible, we can go to Geometry, Edge Loop, Panel Loops, and you're going to see in here there's a lot of options. If you turn off double, you can play with the thickness and the amount of polish and the amount of bevel. And now when you hit I guess my thickness is a little bit much. Let's undo that. There we go. We can start changing the transition between those surfaces there. And of course, you don't even need that mask. So if we just have these selected here, so this is all one polygroup now, I can just isolate it, hit our panel loops, and now we're getting a different transition between those two edges here. So you can kind of play with the settings and panel loops to get what you want, as well as when we isolate this and we frame that mesh border, you can assign smooth brushes to that. If you hold down Shift, go to Stroke, and turn on under Curve mode, now your smooth brush is a curve brush. If you hold down Shift and tap, you can start smoothing that transition. Doesn't work great in this situation because you know, the topology isn't really great for that. But if you had a Dynamesh version of this, it would probably work a little bit better. And there, of course, with ZBrush, there's a million different ways to do these things. So in the future, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more options for transitioning between these harsh surfaces on your union mesh. One quick thing I do want to bring up, just in case you want to do this. Let's go ahead and delete this. We have our union mesh here. Let's go back to our original union mesh. This will be a little bit easier. I'm going to take our subtractive mesh. We'll go back to our gizmo, hit Y or tap this gizmo button, hold down Control, and then just drag out a copy of this. So now we have two versions of this. So when I go into Live Boolean, we've got this mesh here. Let's go ahead and go to our Boolean, make Boolean mesh with dynamic subdivision turned on. Select that one. Now if I want to frame both of these mesh borders, for example, all I need to do is hold down Control-Shift, and we'll isolate these polygroups here. Then we can go to Stroke, Curve Functions, Frame Mesh. And if you want to, you can try doing a BC brush curve multi-tube, but when you do that, it's going to give you different resolutions between the curves. So a better option might be just go to brush curve BC and just do a curve tube and tap 1. And then you hit 5, which if you hover over snapshot here, you can see that's a shortcut for snapshot. That's going to save this brush here. You can hit 5, and now you can use a curve brush to go ahead and make a new one, tap away from your mesh, or go to curve functions, delete, and now you have available to you these two, which we can go ahead and do. Let's go ahead and go Control-Shift, select, Control-Shift, drag to select the invert. Take those, and now we can go to Split, Hidden. And now we can make these a subtractive mesh, turn on a Live Boolean, turn off Polyframe, and then now you can do multiple at the same time.